to make sure we are actually safely recording. Alrighty, okay, cool. So, Dark Bleatings, everyone, welcome back. We have a bit of a different type of sort of creator interview today, because as you can see, I have two people with me. So we've got Frazer Lee, who I'm sure a lot of you will know through a lot of really great books. A few of my favourites are Greyfriars Reformatory, Hearthstone Cottage, and most recently Damnation, the Gothic Game. And we also have Kris Rees, who is the creator of Damnation, the Gothic Game, which I didn't know was a real game until I spoke to Frazer after reading the book. But I did comment in my review before I knew that I loved it because it felt very much like levels of a game to me, and I do love a good game. So welcome both, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So if we can start with you, Kris, and could you just tell people a little bit about the game itself? And then after that, Frazer, if you could talk about your process of sort of adapting it into a novel. It was great, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an amazing story, actually, how Frazer and I came to work on it, because while I've released the board game Damnation, the Gothic Game, that game is actually a new version of a much older game called the Gothic Game. And the original Gothic Game was actually first created in 1965 by a guy called Robert Wynne Simmons, who wrote the screenplay to Blood on Satan's Claw. So he's kind of got this amazing horror heritage in his own right. And so this board game, he made it with his friend, a prominent film critic called Nigel Andrews. And it was sort of done on like handmade boards for a long time with hand-drawn illustrations. And then he decided one day, Robert that is, to try and mass produce it. And that was going back to 1992 when that game then became available. And essentially, the person who illustrated the original game was a lady called Angela White, who did the logo for London Dungeon. And who was working in London Dungeon at that time? But I don't know if I've given anything away that you don't want me to be sharing here, Frazer, but it was Frazer Lee.
Well, that's such a cool connection for how you all get together. So it's a board game. I didn't know if it was like a tabletop RPG or a board game or.
Yeah, it's a board game, and essentially it's kind of like a battle royale style of game. It takes place in Dracula's castle. The goal is to be the last surviving player, and the original, it's changed a little bit from the original, but that core theme remains the same. But yeah, that's it basically.
I used to love board games, and I still do, but I find it hard to find people to play them with me now. But anything that had any sort of horror or gothic slant to it, I loved. I had there's this one called Escape the Blob that no one has heard of, but it was just my favorite. And you just little counters, and then you roll the dice, and you're either moving your counters or the blob, and you have to eat the other player's counters. And this game sounds like a cross between that and those old Atmosphere games to me, like that kind of fun. So how did the idea for novelizing it come about?
So I was running a Kickstarter campaign to raise funds to mass produce it. And Frazer got in touch with me out of the blue. And I can't remember how the initial conversation started, but I think you were just a fan of the original game, and you just reached out to offer your support and say how excited you were, which is amazing really to get messages like that. And then we got talking, and we've got a couple of connections actually. Like I went to school with an actor who'd starred in a screenplay for the film that you'd done, and there was a few things. So we got talking, and I think we become pretty friendly. And you suggested the idea of writing a novel, an accompanying novel, and I just sounded such like, how could I not say yes to that? To work with Frazer on something so that was so close to my heart, and I just felt like it would tie in perfectly. yeah, it was just impossible to say no, really.
It's it's a great story on its own, but knowing that it's based on a game makes it so much more fun for some reason. How did you approach sort of the characters and everything, Frazer? Because I assume that they're characters that you play in the game, or did you just make the characters up?
No, the beauty of this was that I was really fanboying hard about this game coming back, because as Kris intimated, I was working at the London Dungeon when the prototype game dropped into the office, and we had a gift shop at the dungeon, and I was, a professional scarer of people. So they would always come to me to ask me, is this a product that we should really stock in the shop? So I took the Gothic game home with me and we played it, and loved that angle of you had to kill everyone else on the board. And it became a staple of like Halloween parties after that. And there were a few things missing from that original iteration of the game, as much as I love it. And one was that people were sort of creating their own characterizations as they went along. You could kind of tell the people you were playing with, they'd played Call of Cthulhu or AD&D or RuneQuest or whatever, because they'd be like, oh, my character wouldn't do that. So what happened was Kris had already developed so many ideas for the game, the board. There was now going to be a graveyard area, which was fantastic because it chimed with a desire to see that a lot of us Gothic game fans had. But crucially, there were character biographies in the offing, a rogues gallery of Victorian era villains and anti-heroes, shall we say. So there was a lot of material to plug into there, and it was really, I mean, my notebook, it started overflowing after our first couple of discussions, really. And it was finding the right sort of level for each character to be at when they enter the castle that was crucial, because that would snowball into the outcome of this novel, which is very much, I see it very much as like one version of playing the game. It's like how the game could turn out on a dark and stormy night, and then you could flick back to the first page and it could play out slightly differently next time. And I think early on, Kris, correct me if I'm wrong, but we sort of agreed, we met in the middle on the book should inspire people to play the game, and the game should inspire people to read the book, so that's really the feeling I was going for. And what the main sort of selling point of this new revamped, pun intended, iteration of the game was the characters. So you've got occultists, and you've got hunter collectors and all this kind of stuff. And this was a real kind of joy for me, digging deeper into those characters and getting into their heads a bit more. And Kris was very generous with his time, giving me reference artwork and suggesting other books and films and other contextual sources that I could go to get a handle on these characters. I think one of the real kind of surprises of the journey was leaning heavily into like Lovecraftian sort of cosmic horror with one of the characters. I don't want to give spoilers away for the book because I want people to pick it up and enjoy that. My original take on that was much more leaning into Aleister Crowley and the Church of Thelema, and I was obsessed with this idea of like a hidden temple somewhere. But Kris's take on it was much more look, we've got the author of the Necronomicon here. Let's go hard with that. So that was a real journey, kind of trying things out, an early draft, throwing things down, and some pieces of the puzzle stayed pretty much as they were. Others got moved around, and long story short, we end up with a situation where you're in the castle with these people, and you are genuinely wondering who, if any, are going to survive the night. I'm always thinking back to that Texas Chainsaw Massacre tagline on the poster: who will survive and what will be left of them.
Yeah, it's so much fun. So I'm not just saying this for everybody watching or listening. Like, this is such a good book, and anyone who follows my channel or reads my reviews will know already that I read this during my mad month of May, where I got stressed because I had a lot of pending review requests. And as a joke, I was like, do you know what? I'm going to read all the review requests that are left in May. And then I counted them, and they were 63 books on my review pile. And I didn't think I was going to make it. But then I started to get quite obsessive once I hit the halfway point, and I was about halfway through the month, and I was like, oh, maybe I can. And so obviously I read a lot, enough to break my eyes a little bit. And your Damnation is one of the books that I remember really vividly. So, and I do think that that is saying something. When I read so many stories, like, to be honest, quite a few of them I vaguely remember reading. I'm like, oh, I recognize the title, but this one, I can still remember how I felt when I was reading it and how much I was enjoying reading it. And I slowed down reading to actually like really get like the full sense of the book. And I'm really glad that I'd read work from you before, Frazer, and this wasn't the first one, because I did put this in my review as well, that I was really amazed by how you captured all of these different characters' voices, because I feel familiar with your usual writing style, and this was a little bit of a departure, but it was just so funny. I don't know if that's my demented sense of humor, but there are characters like the turn of phrase and the outlook and everything, and obviously it was so fun, the element, like the game kind of feeling element to it. I was thinking this would be such a good game, and then I was delighted to find out it is a game that I can play.
Yeah.
In terms of, so Kris, in terms of settings and everything, and why you were drawn to the original game, is this your usual wheelhouse? Do you work in games and stuff normally?
No, actually. So I work for a charity. That's like my day-to-day job. It's just that it's always been a bit of an ambition of mine to make a game, and so in 2017, I founded a company which I run in my spare time, which is essentially a board game publishing company. And it took me 8 years to make the game, so I had a long time, to kind of think about things and for things to evolve and change. And so as things stand, I mean, it's still a part-time endeavor, but it's something that I really enjoy. So as stressful as it was to do it, my hope. Well, I'm working on a second game now, so yeah, I guess it's become part of my wheelhouse, so to speak. But it's not my main the main thing that I do. But just going back to what Frazer was talking about with the characters and things like that, I just fundamentally I'm really drawn to stories where you have incredibly strong characters and then the idea of pitting them against one another. So I think that is something that's just I inherently find interesting. I read the book Battle Royale, and I think that definitely influenced me as well. But really, I can't sort of talk about it without mentioning the original as well, because the original one that had a lot of quite like slapstick humor to it, and it featured a lot of references that were a kind of a bit older. So what I did when I did this version was, I suppose I was a little bit selfish. I included more references to things that were more culturally interesting for me. So the original one, for example, has a quote from Monty Python cast member Terry Jones on it. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I really should know that, shouldn't I? But it's something like, I haven't had so much fun since I became a vampire. I think it's something like that. And so yeah, it's that kind of slapstick kind of humor, whereas this one's a little drier and more influenced by like Hammer horror stuff that I grew up watching. There's even some like modern day references in there. Like there's a card in there. It's called Precious, and it's the illustration is reminiscent of like Gollum holding the ring. So there's little things like that I've just concluded because it's all the kind of cultural stuff that that I was really inspired by.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to actually playing this game. My brother loves games in all of their forms, and he says that he thinks they're a great storytelling medium because they're immersive. So you're not just reading or watching, but you're actively involved, which is why it's a great avenue for horror, because if you're the one in the thing, it's very scary. Well, if you're me anyway, I'm quite a wimp, especially with video games. Um, do you think, this is for both of you, this question, do you think that there's a difference in how you go about the storytelling construction in a game as opposed to something like a film or a book? Or is it just a more practical version of, do you think?
Do you want to go first, Frazer?
I mean, I think it's like improv in a game. You know, you have your rules, your set of rules, you have your goals and objectives, but then you get the element of chance with the dice rolls and characters being forced to make decisions, and that reflects any storytelling narrative process. But there's a dynamism to game narratives where part of it is random. There's the randomized luck of the roll kind of factor. I mean, I realized during the writing of this novel, which, you know, took a couple of years on and off, I was reminded of some of my early sort of games mastering attempts in Call of Cthulhu and D&D and RuneQuest. Those are the main three that I played. But those were really early storytelling attempts before I sort of sat down and actually tried to write a short story or God forbid, a novel or a screenplay. These were unfolding narratives with your friends, and characters embodied by your friends would do surprising things. They would do off the cuff surprising things, and there'd be a lot of laughter in the darkest moments, you know, which I think carries through with the tone that we set for the novel, and also to like honor the fire of what had gone before with jokes about the suffocating prunes and the lavatory and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that gaming, it opens up kind of a storytelling kind of squeegee sort of third eye, and allows you to explore, to play. To play is to allow yourself the possibilities. And when you sit down to write on your own, I do think a similar thing happens. The characters surprise you sometimes with where they're leading you through the story. Sometimes things go off plan and tangential, and you just kind of have to wing it and follow for a while. Whereas, you know, in a game, that's part of the fun of it, is letting go and allowing things to unfold. Now, early in the process, I was very lucky, very excited as well to play an online version of the board game with Kris and a few others, before the physical board was in front of me. And I died very quickly, and and I was chuckling about that because I was like, I felt that was poetic justice, because of course I was about to embark on a journey where I would narratively bump off a lot of characters in the story, so it was getting done to me first. But then I sat back, and obviously in the new iteration of the game you can haunt the other characters, which is brilliant and great fun. But it reminded me that once again I'm in observational mode, and just from having a playthrough of the game already started to give me ideas about how chapter 3 could go, for example, or whatever. And I think the two things speak to each other really fluently. And more writers should game, and more gamers should write, maybe.
Yeah, I think they're lovely avenues of sort of creative art and things you can enjoy that go just hand in hand beautifully. The first few stories I remember, I had this epiphany the other day. I used to write a lot of stories when I was a kid. I've only just realized I was writing fan fiction of board games. So that Escape the Blob one, I had a series called Island of the Blob, and it was me and all my friends on an island trying to escape the blob. And I think I was about 9 when I started writing those. And I also had some Final Fantasy VIII fanfic, and you know, the Resident Evil stuff. So yeah, Kris, what do you think about Yeah, gaming is a storytelling mode.
So I think there are some games that are more suited to it than others. So going back to what Fraser was saying, particularly role-playing games. I mean, it's all storytelling, isn't it? Shared storytelling, and it's just an amazing thing. There are some games, some modern games that I think ones that sometimes are very kind of dry and they're less suited to telling stories, perhaps. I don't want to name any that I'm thinking of, just because I'm sure people would disagree with me. But this one, and I think it's probably the thing that I'm proudest of, and it's been picked up in the reviews actually that people have written for the game, is how it creates this emerging narrative as you play it. And it genuinely is different every time. So there are all sorts of factors that contribute to that. So, for example, there's enough different cards in the game to ensure that you're never going to draw the exact same cards from one game to the next. So it's always going to be a little bit different. And then there's the variability around where you might start in the castle. And then there's the luck of the dice, what cards you draw, and so on. The players' decisions, they all basically create a different story, and it all goes back to what Fraser said at the beginning there. Like, it genuinely could be a playthrough of the game, the story that Fraser wrote, and someone could play the game and write a story based on what happened in that game, which is an amazing thing, really. And it's definitely my favorite aspect of it, and I think it's something that it helps players to become a bit immersed into it, and hopefully not take it too seriously, because that's the other crucial thing with it. I wanted to create a horror game, and so the game, I was very like, the original game, the original Gothic game, features player elimination, which is very unfashionable, shall we say, in today's with today's board gamers. And so, but I wanted to include that because you need to feel it, like there's a sense of danger in the game. If you do something wrong or something catches you and you die, you feel the weight of that, either that you yourself are out of the game or that you have put someone out of the game. And it's quite an interesting emotion to play with, because you don't really see it in many games, as I say. And so what we did to try and kind of strike a balance with that, because obviously it is frustrating for people as well, because the game might go on for an hour or even an hour and a half potentially, depending on how many people are playing. So you don't want to have someone knocked out of the game and for an hour while their friends continue to play. So that's where the concept around haunting the castle and haunting the other players came in. And so it's like a little mini game that you play to try and return into the game. So it strikes a good balance. But if people want to play it the old-fashioned way, that they can as well. So it's the thing I'm most proud of, I would say, with the game is the stories that it creates.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have that sense of danger, otherwise it is not horror, in my opinion. I actually miss that about video games as well, because I feel like things are very spoon-fed. I don't have a lot of time to game, and I'm awful at games as well, video games especially. As soon as we got to you have to control things with 2 sticks, I was like, oh no, it took me a while to get used to that. But I remember playing Resident Evil 3, the original Nemesis one, and running through a door when the danger music was playing, thinking, oh, it's okay, I'm through the door. And then he came through after me. And that had never happened before. And I was like, oh, and yeah, that was when I realized, like, I think that's the first video game I played where aspects of the game changed depending on your decisions, where like that was unheard of for me. I made it very scary, because then on a replay I was like, well, he came through that window last time and now I don't know where he is.
For sure. One thing about that, because I totally agree with you, sometimes it's the perception of danger as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be danger. Like, so I've seen a really creative example of this. There's a video game called Senua's Sacrifice. I don't know if you've ever played it, but it's fantastic. It's one of the best games I've played, and it's got strong horror elements to it. And it tells you at the beginning of the game that you have a finite amount of lives, but it won't tell you how many lives you have. But in truth, you do have an infinite amount of lives. By the end of the game, you're a nervous wreck playing it, because you're like, I could die any second here. But no, you find out kind of afterwards, you've been tricked.
Is that the one where you go through fighting people, and if you die, you age?
No, that's is that Sifu? Is it the Kung Fu one?
My husband was playing that, and he was getting so stressed. He was like, "Oh, I'm gonna have to start again because I'm already 70. I'm never gonna get to this."
Yeah, no, it's not that one.
Story of my life, that is.
just desperately trying not to age. I just embracing it now. I find that every decade is better than the last age bracket, so I just, whatever. Yeah. So, do you think you guys are going to work on anything else together?
Oh,
because it's a great collaboration, this first one. Like, what a home run of a project.
Lightning doesn't always strike twice, but I'd be open to it, Kris. It's just finding that right moment, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, 100%.
We're obviously still talking to each other.
Yes, seem friendly. So I'm curious about, can you remember what your first significant story experiences were, like in games or books or whatever? Like the first thing you consumed that made you feel strongly about storytelling or enjoying stories?
Go on, Kris, you first. You first.
Yours will be more impressive than mine.
So polite, you two.
No. After you, Kris.
Okay. Well, the first thing that springs to mind, I read a trilogy of books called The Dragonlance Chronicles. I don't know if you've ever heard of those, by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. And I didn't read when I was younger. I was kind of interested. So I played like games and board games and things. I got into Dungeons and Dragons through a friend's dad who used to play the game with us when we were super young, like 7 and 8 years old. So I've always kind of been open to that kind of setting. And my friend was reading this series of books, and he recommended it to me, and I picked them up, and I couldn't put them down. And there are some scenes in that kind of. They'll make you sad, they'll make you laugh, they'll make you cheer, it's a full gamut of emotions. And yeah, that experience probably is the one that would stick with me the most, I would say, because it's opened up the door then for, all sorts of other books. Whereas I kind of had a heavy lean in towards fantasy when I was younger, and that's sort of evolved into different genres now. But yeah, that's my answer.
Good answer.
Yeah.
For me, it was the first book that made me cry. So I was an avid reader. I was very lucky to have a mother who took me to the library every week, and I fell in love with loads of authors. My school library as well had an entire shelf of Alan Garner, which was quite influencing on me from an early age and all through my life. But it was Ronald Welsh's book, The Gauntlet, that just floored me. I was 9 or 10 years old, maybe, and I got this book from the library, and it just transported me into a medieval castle for the duration of the book, along with the young protagonist who finds this gauntlet in the woods and is taken into this other world. And his level of historical detail was second to none. You really felt you were there. His sensory writing was amazing. He put you in the place, you believed the people, you heard the dialects, everything. It was immersive, and it totally blew me away. And when I finished reading, I just broke down in tears, and I realized I'd been living and breathing that book with every turn of the page. And that's the thing. Afterwards, I was thinking, I want to do that. So, I don't think I've made anyone cry, but maybe I've made them whimper a bit because I've written something so disgustingly horrible and they just want to be rid of it. But mate, you know, any review is a good review, right? But yeah, that's my answer. I read a lot, but that was the one that there was something special going on with that one.
Well, I find your work very disturbing, which I mean as a compliment. So,
thank you.
Yes, I really enjoy being disturbed, but because don't take that out of context, anyone. That's one of those sound clips of I very rarely actually scared, but I pretty much exclusively read horror, so that's why probably. But yeah, if I feel uneasy, then that's very welcome in the reading experience. Kris, I have to know what made you want to make a game in the first place, other than enjoying games. But that's quite a sort of venture to embark on, because I loved how casually you said it. It's all like, oh, I just decided I wanted to make a game, so I just made this gaming company. It's like that's, I mean, that's great. Like that is like an achievement, and you just said it so casually. I just wanted to go back and talk about that a little bit more.
Okay. It probably goes back actually to my friend's dad, who I said played Dungeons and Dragons with us. I think it's such a time in people's lives, I think, where they're so suggestible and easily influenced. And I suppose it's a bit like, you know, whereas Frazer had the moment he described there, I probably had a similar experience, just around having like a great time playing these games. And I would sometimes imagine, oh, well, what if we could do this or do that? And so it's always been something that I've had an interest and a fascination in. Like, so for example, I've tried to kind of work it into whatever it was that I was doing at the time. So I remember I did a degree in design for interactive media, and as my project, I created a game design document for a fictional game, an imaginary game. But I wanted to know what the process looked like of creating a video game. And I actually contacted George R. R. Martin to ask for permission to set it in this Game of Thrones universe, and he did give me permission to do it. Although he did make it clear that I couldn't sell it. So, this is going back to when he would have, you know, he wasn't quite as big as he is now. I just read. He'd just done released his third book, Storm of Swords, and so it was around about that time. But I've always been fascinated. Then I became a teacher later on in my career, and as my dissertation, I wrote about the differences between intrinsic versus extrinsic learning and the impact that can have on children. So there's a lot of kind of work being done at the moment about, you know, how can you make kids learn without them realizing that they're necessarily learning, and games can be a really interesting way to do that. So as I said, I've just, you know, reflected on that. It's always been there, and I think I always thought that I'd just never be able to do it. I'd never be able to accomplish it because, you know, the resources that you need in order to do something like that are just so vast. And then I read a story one day about a guy called Adam Poots, and this person was a graphic designer, I think I'm right in saying, in New York, and he created a game from scratch called Kingdom Death Monster, which is a horror board game, which you should probably check out as well. And he just did amazingly well, and he raised the funds to do it through a crowdfunding platform called Kickstarter, which again I'd never heard of. And at the time, I was just getting back into board gaming with a group of friends, and basically I was looking for a copy of the Gothic Game because I couldn't find my original copy, and I was looking everywhere for it, and I couldn't find it. And I contacted Robert Wynne Simmons, and I thought, well, he'll never get back to me, but he did get back to me, and he had a copy that he sold me, and I think it was all these things that were happening around about the same time that somehow sparked the thought, well, there seems to be an audience out there for this game, because there was lots of other people looking for it as well. There seems to be an audience out there for this game, and people can make games now, you know, using crowdfunding. So maybe I could do that, and that's really how it all started. And then, sort of 8 years later, I had the game.
That's so it's just so inspiring. I love that. I think things that start as passion projects, I'm always really happy when something does well, when it's born out of someone just loves a thing. And it has, and it, you know, because some people are really business minded and like, how can I make money out of a thing? And then you got other people who are like, oh, I just really want to make it. I just want it to exist. And yeah, it's just so fun. What about your wait, hang on. I can't even remember the original question I just asked you. Am I about to skip over Frazer before I ask another one? But no, gaming. No, that's what we were talking about.
It was really like how can I just say, you know, Kris, very modest when he speaks about what he's achieved.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, I decided to do the game because I loved it, and 8 years later. I mean, this guy's level of genius off the scale putting this thing together, and weaker mortals would have given up after year 1. You know?
Yeah.
Let alone see it across the finish line year 8. Not only the game, but an expansion set, a novelization, to deal with an egocentric author to deliver that, a soundtrack to play while you're playing the game. I mean, amazing levels of vision here. Yeah. So if you go to the Black Letter Games website, you'll find all of this stuff, and you can download soundscapes to play while you're playing the game. I mean,
that's amazing.
I've used some of that music while I've been writing other stuff. It's really that good. It's deeply cinematic. But yeah, I think your original point, Kaylee, was like, what was that moment where Kris decided to do this as a venture?
Thank you.
But you know, it's clear that it just stems from a place of love, doesn't it? It's the love of a thing, you know. If you love a thing enough, you want to do a thing, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to move on to horror preferences and first things in a minute. But Frazer, can you talk about your I don't know if you can remember. Some of us have been writing since we were like 3, but and all of my stuff from that time period is absolute garbage. But can you remember the first time that you really enjoyed writing a story?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say I had a brilliant English teacher at junior school called Mrs. Quick. I homaged Mrs. Quick in Greyfriars Reformatory, a novel where she's really not a nice person, but I think the real Mrs. Quick, wherever she is, would get a kick out of that. She was a really funny, very open teacher. She didn't belittle you. She allowed you to have your own ideas. And I wrote a short science fiction story for her class, which I thought was batshit crazy, and it was never going to get looked at. And she asked me to read a bit out in the class and supported me in that way, and said, wow, it's got a vocabulary all of its own, rather than saying this is complete gobbledygook, you made it up. So it was that positivity. I felt good while I was writing it, but I'm not going to lie, I felt even better when someone liked it or gave it the time of day. And I think a lot of writers are fibbing if they say they're writing for themselves and, you know, I don't care what people think of it, you know. We all want someone to like it. We want someone to connect with it in some way. So that moment in time did both for me. I had enjoyed writing the story and having the freedom of expression. It was a very small scale alien invasion story called Arrival. I think I really loved writing that, but it was that second phase, which was what happens next with the story when you share it with people, and suddenly it starts to take on a life of itself, of its own, and people start making suggestions, you know, about how, oh, do you thought about doing it this way and that way, and you know, suddenly you're in a writer's workshop, you know, great. So you're either the kind of person who likes to go into the gallery and look at the flowers, or you're the kind of person who goes in to look at Francis Bacon, you know, and if you're willing to push yourself a bit further and develop a thick skin, listen to criticism, take feedback, it becomes addictive. You know?
Yeah, I'm always telling, especially new writers, I always tell people, do not respond to a bad review or criticism because it's not really for you. But at the same time, I would be lying if I said I didn't read my reviews when I get them. And I have had a few like negative ones where someone, just didn't like the story or something. But I always take that as a good sign that your work is getting further afield than your close family and friends, because the people closest to you are not very likely to write an honest critical review of anything you do. True. So once you start hitting people going, well, the ending was shit, I'm like, it's gone further afield. That's how I started marking success with any sales or anything.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that didn't happen in class with that short story. That might have led me down a different path. But yeah, you can't be accused of sock puppeting or anything, can you? If you've got a range of reviews, actually, it makes your work more authentic, doesn't it? Because try and get everyone to like one thing, it's impossible. There'll always be detractors.
I think something comes across as just more credible, like the review pool is more authentic if there's a big range of stuff in there. Like Stephen King gets terrible 1-star reviews, and he's one of the most successful authors on the planet. So
yeah, I'm sure he loses a lot of sleep over those as he sleeps on his pillow made of cash.
I can imagine him just weeping. Oh my god, they didn't like Dreamcatcher. Oh no.
It's over for me. I'm hanging it up. I'm putting my pen down right now.
Yeah.
No, he's got another 3 novels coming out before Christmas. It's fine.
Yeah. Oh, we all dream of that level of success, So horror stuff then. So so Kris, you said that you wanted to make a horror game specifically. So what is it about horror that draws you? And can you remember your first few horrors that you really enjoyed?
I can remember my first few horrors that I didn't enjoy. So my granddad, half my family from Scotland, and my Scottish granddad, he would get out films that were not suitable at all for a person as young as I was, and I think it gave me like this. Well, I get really scared, but I think he would want me to like them. I could feel that he wanted me to like them like he did. And so, I don't know, I think it maybe created something. And then, I mean, in terms of horrors that I like, I've grown to like them. And obviously, that'd be crazy if I didn't. But then there's still a limit to the kind of horror that I enjoy. Even now, my partner is into extreme horror, like, Japanese movies and stuff like what was the film? Martyrs. You ever seen Martyrs?
Yeah, never again.
Yeah, never again. Never again. So like stuff like that
is just smiling there.
That's probably soft for Frazer. But
it's Disney Pixar for me.
Yeah. So I quite like. I found my my favorite type of horror. I always kind of liked more supernatural stuff than the realistic stuff, because I think it did create that boundary for me. But in terms of the first few horrors that I really liked, I loved the movie Dracula, and I used to watch Hammer horror films as well, which I could get along with. They were okay. And in terms of reading, I'm trying to think what it was, but I think the first horror book that I really truly loved, and it's one of my favorite books, was I Am Legend.
Yeah.
I don't like the film, but I love the book, and I read it in one sitting as well, which I don't do that very often. So that would be it for me.
Yeah, I'm with you on I Am Legend. That was one of the first books I read in one sitting when I was a teenager, and it did. I think maybe that was the first. No, The Stand was the first sort of apocalyptic thing I read, but that was amazing. What about you, Frazer? What are your first horror loves?
Well, I don't want to get out the violin, but I was sort of left alone a lot when I was young, and I had the dog and the TV company, and I would tune into the Hammer Horror double bills and the Universal Monsters double bills. And I used to get a little bit scared sometimes by these things I was watching before I should have been watching them, a bit like you, Chris. I also had aunties and uncles who, when we entered the VCR era, you know, movies like Amityville 2, The Possession, John Carpenter's The Thing, the Toby Hooper Salem's Lot, scared the bejesus out of me. But I was of a mind to rewind and want to see how they did it. So again, I'm thinking, how can I do this? This is fun. But also, I used to listen to, you know, like armchair theatre and things like that on the radio. When I was sent off to bed and couldn't stay up and watch TV anymore, I was listening to these like creaky old like radio murder mysteries, and they were borderline horror. And a lot of the short stories that I was reading sort of leaned into horror a bit. Some of the Ray Bradbury stuff, it's getting quite dark. And really, like the characters like Dracula and Frankenstein's monster and the creature from the Black Lagoon, these characters became like family, extended family and friends. They were dependable. They would always deliver, you know. And like Christopher Lee, because my surname is Lee, I fantasized that he was my relation in some way, you know. Which Dracula actually, Chris, which was your first Dracula? Was it Bela Lugosi, or did you see Christopher Lee?
I can't quite remember. I think it was Bela Lugosi, because I remember he was sort of who I visualized if I thought of Dracula. Like, he's the first person who would come to mind. So it was probably that version. But yeah. I now prefer the Christopher Lee version personally. It's that's the one that's synonymous with it for me.
In a couple of those films, Christopher Lee's Dracula is really cruel, and I really like that, especially Prince of Darkness, which is probably still my favorite. I mean, Scars of Dracula gets quite S&M in places, and it's like a precursor to Hellraiser, really, more than people give it credence. But I think that's part of the characterization I wanted to put into the Damnation as well, that playful kind of cruelty. You know, like, I'm having a bad day, so you lot are going to suffer. And it's kind of like Dracula's Groundhog Day in a way. Really good fun.
It was so much fun because it starts off, so they're traveling, and then they're at the castle. It is a castle, isn't it? Yeah. I had this. I can still remember what I pictured when I was reading it. It was just so beautifully done, and I just remember thinking, oh no, I think they're all dead, like really near the beginning, and then the characters and the the guy whose castle it was. Like every time he appeared, I was like, oh no. So it was a mix of like really entertaining, like funny, especially that one character I really made me laugh every time I turned the page and realized that he was there. And then also it did have me on the edge of my seat, like like, oh, I don't know, how is this going to go? Is everyone going to be okay? It's funny how horror develops over time, isn't it? Because I was going to say, Christopher Lee, like my nan has been scared of Christopher Lee since his first Dracula film. Like, not just Dracula, Christopher Lee. Like, she's always been scared of him. And then I didn't watch the old, like, the Hammer horror ones until recently, the last few years. And so to me, this first time I saw, like, Bela Lugosi, I was like, what a cute little fruity outfit. Like, you know, but like this is like really scary to people at the time. So it's funny how it develops. I can't get into the extreme horror stuff either, though, Chris. Like the extreme human suffering is too much for me. I'd rather watch, you know, zombies or something because they're not real. So it's like where I like to go. So okay.
Plenty of time to run away, while they're shuffling after you.
Do you know, I made a terrible error once. I picked up Sour Candy by Keelan Patrick Burke, and I loved it. And it was a little supernatural sort of horror novella, and I really enjoyed it. And then I was like, I'll find more Keelan Patrick Burke. And then the next thing I picked up was Kin, which is it's more along the lines of I don't know, Wrong Turn or The Hills Have Eyes. Like, I think this is a film called Frontiers that scarred me for life as well. And I thought, oh, I have to do my homework next time. That was a bit much. So in terms of, by the way, for anyone watching listening, I will put the links to absolutely everything in the description so you guys can find everything really easily. And yeah, anything we've talked about, I'll link as well. What's next for you guys separately? What are you kind of doing now?
After you, Fraser.
Oh, so kind. Well, I'll be quick. I'm not done with Dracula yet, so this is Chris's fault. But the old curmudgeon is still percolating around the brain pan. So I have been working on a Gothic horror novel with a lot of political satire in it. Ooh. And the what if scenario is what if sort of a COVID type thing hit in 1895 and Mina Murray and Lucy Westenra were the main characters in this story, and I have been having a lot of fun with it, let me tell you. So the working title is Prime Sinister. Make of that what you will. I'm not done with it yet. Still a lot of tweaking and exploring, but I'm having a ball with that. So that could be the 8th novel. I've also been working on a horror comedy feature film project called Death by PowerPoint with my colleagues at Brunel University London, where I teach, and we are following hot on the heels of the legendary Kris here, and it could be hitting a Kickstarter near you soon. It's about a horror screenwriting masterclass that turns into a bloodbath.
Oh, nice!
on Halloween night. It's got a lot of scares and a lot of laughs, and I really hope we get to make it, because it's one of those passion projects you were talking about earlier. You just love this kind of thing. You want to show it. So fingers crossed. Let's see.
Well, that sounds
over to you, Kris.
So I'm working on another game, a second game, and this one is going to be based around the gunpowder plot. So it's called Gunpowder, Treason and Plot, and it's got Guy Fawkes and all that. It's all that kind of thing. It's a social deduction game. So essentially one group of people is trying to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and one person is like a traitor to the group, and they're trying to stop it while remaining hidden from their co-conspirators. It's got again a brilliant artist attached to it, a really incredibly talented person called Thomas Hijo, who does the most stunning like lithocut art, which just kind of works perfectly. So I'm really excited about that and looking to launch that in 2025.
Cool. Oh, it's so exciting.
It looks beautiful, Kris. Can't wait to play it, man. Can't wait to play it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, let me know when you have new things, and I can do a little promo piece on the website for you. I'd love to keep me up to date on that. That sounds really cool.
It's brilliant because we could play Damnation on Halloween and
yeah,
your new game on Bonfire Night.
Yeah, you'll have to. Yeah, you're gonna have to just go through like all of the big holidays.
Yeah,
that's it.
Holidays.
And then it's themed.
Okay, so I think that's probably a good place to round things off for our audience. If you two hang back after we, hang up on everybody else, I can say bye properly to you then. And I wanted to ask you some nosy questions, but not while we're recording. So yes, as I said earlier, we will put everything in the description so you can find games and books and everything we talked about. And sorry, what was the company called, Kris? I did write it down. Oh, Black Letter Games.
Black Letter Games, yeah.
Black Letter Games, yes. Thank you again so much both for being here, because I love getting to talk about books, obviously, but all games I can't, I don't have as much of a pool of people to rope in for these things for gaming, so it's just always so interesting for me to hear the sort of like behind the scenes process of that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, I really appreciate you both being here, and yeah, so make sure everyone that you check everything out, and we're going to sign off with our goatee sign off of bleat. So we're just gonna go bleat.